What's up, y'all? It's Zach, Living Corporate, and look, it's Tuesday. The day of this recording is May 4th. We have, so May the 4th be with you. We have incredible guests every single time we come on. We come to y'all with something, and today is no different because what we're trying to do is what we always do, right? Which is center and amplify marginalized voices in the workplace. Now, I would like to think that Living Corporate is a little bit unique in that we're having these conversations, but we're having these not only having these conversations, but that are centering marginalized voices, but we're having these conversations with marginalized identity groups, right? So a lot of times when you think about this diversity, equity, inclusion space, it's folks who don't look like me using fairly esoteric, like heady language to describe things that they really don't experience, right? Not to put too fine a point on it. I'm just gonna be honest, right? Just gonna be a straight shooter, okay? I'm proud of the fact that we've been able to have incredible guests that have not only the lived experience, but have the practical knowledge and expertise to talk about real subjects. And so that's why our tagline for Living Corporate is Real Talk in the Corporate World. Now look, some of y'all been listening to us, been rocking with us for a while, but every episode is somebody's first episode. So I just want to make sure I kind of level set a little bit. So with all that being said, I'm really excited to have our guest today, Mary Frances Winters. Mary Frances Winters is the founder and CEO of the Winters Group, Inc., a global organization development and diversity and inclusion consulting firm with over 35, count them y'all, 35, longer than I've been alive, 35 years of experience. She truly believes that diversity and inclusion work is her passion and calling. She's been dubbed a thought leader in the field for the past 3 decades and impacted over hundreds of organizations and thousands of individuals with her thought-provoking messages and her approach to diversity and inclusion. Miss Winters is a master strategist with experience in strategic planning, change management, diversity, organization development, training facilitation, systems thinking. Shout out to systems thinking, qualitative and quantitative research methods. And she has extensive experience in working with senior leadership teams to drive organizational change. My goodness gracious. With all that being said, Mary Frances, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh,
yeah,
no
you're definitely dating me, but that's all right.
I apologize. I wasn't trying to date you. I was forgive me. I was trying to speak to the depth and breadth of the work that you've been doing. Cause I think a lot of times it's easy, kind of speak like pausing on just like on this conversation, just kind of like thinking about like generational tensions. Right. So like, I think there's a lot of frustration sometimes with folks who like millennials, folks like in the early 30s or even like mid 20s to late 20s crowd who just think that like all these frustrations that we're seeing now are new, right? Like, but there have been folks who have built foundations before us that allow us to actually move forward. And so it's just incredible that you've been in this space and doing this and for a significant amount of time. I don't believe that should be taken lightly at all. So
well, thank you. I appreciate it. I accept it with honor and respect. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. So how are you doing during this time? Like I said, we're recording this on May 4th. How are you and your loved ones?
We're well. We're doing well. It is unprecedented times. It's very, very difficult times for the world. But we're doing well. And thank you for asking.
So let's get right into it. Diversity, equity, and inclusion work is about marginalized identities. Yet the loudest voices in this space tend to be those of the majority, right? So when you think about like these big organizations, and you look at like the chief inclusion officer or the chief people officer or the chief culture officer, they're typically white folks. Why do you think that is?
Well, I don't think that the dominant group sees diversity, equity, and inclusion as being about marginalized folks. They see it as being about everybody. We have to include everybody. And so some of what my frustration has been, as you mentioned, 35 years. And so when we used to talk about it, in the days of affirmative action, there were protected groups, right? And the initiatives were targeted towards those protected groups. When we started to talk about it as being diversity, then it broadened and everybody got included in diversity. And the group that gets least talked about now are Black folks, because they don't want to talk about Black people. So I don't think that the dominant group who controls the narrative, I don't think that they see it about being about marginalized identities only, right? And so the focus may or may not be there, depending. And so we did a session for a client not too long ago to talk about the relevancy of white men in the organization. And so, we've got to be inclusive of white men. So, yeah. So that's why I think, you asked me why I think that is, that's why I think that is.
So let's talk about that, though.
Because in the corporate world, let me just say this too. In the corporate world, we don't even use the word marginalized identities. So it's not a new term in sociology, but let me tell you, 35 years in this business, it's a new term in the corporate world. It's starting to be used, and I think it is because of the influence of the millennials. Been doing some work in some organizations that is, more millennial. So some of these older traditional organizations have been around 150 years. They still got baby boomers at the helm, right? Some of these other organizations have been around 15, 20 years. They got a lot of millennials at the helm. Those organizations are using this language, the social justice language. The traditional organizations, not so much.
So one, thank you. I'm really curious. That really is a really good segue into the next question I have for you about just you showing up, doing this work as a Black woman, and again, not to age you, we're talking about the fact that like you're not. It's not like you're a Black woman who just graduated from college and is like, you're in this space, or you just finished B school. Like, you're someone who has seen this space grow and evolve and change and shift and permutate, various times over the past 3.5 decades. And so I'm curious, like, what does it look like for you to operate in this space? And then specifically going into the example that you just provided, how do you respond to narratives like that, white men need to feel just as included as Black men or other marginalized groups? Yes.
So as a Black woman in this work, cisgender, heterosexual, Black woman, baby boomer, there are different ways that it impacts me. So one way that it impacts me is, let's get Mary Frances because she can bring the voice of Black folks. No, Mary Frances brings her voice, not all Black folks, right?
Right.
That's one way. This other way is, we really can't hire the Winters Group to do this. This is a Black person talking now because you're Black and I'm Black. And the optics of it looks like we might be giving you, preferential treatment.
Right.
The third way is when I stand in front of a group, to the question about, white men, if my message is going to get across, I do in some ways have to disarm white men because they see me coming in with my sister locks and, this Black woman is going to come in and she's going to tell us, how racist we are. She's going to make us feel bad. And so what I've learned over the years is that you got to get them to like you first, no matter what. They got to like you. Right. And they have to think that the message resonates. So I learn the language. I learn the language of the organization. I connect my message to whatever their business plan is, whatever their business strategy is. I connect it to that because, you're already coming in, being Black, being a woman. So those are two historic marginalized groups. And so, so there are different ways. And, you talk about code switching, right? So we have to code switch a lot of times in order to get the work done, particularly in corporate spaces. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, I'm sure you've noticed because my colleague, Brittany J. Harris, who's the vice president of the Winters Group. And we're doing a series right now in our Inclusion Solution blog on decolonizing DEI work. And, part of that, and I wrote a couple of weeks ago about decolonizing particularly the corporate world with the corporate speak. So you come in and they have to have a business case, and the business case has to be, how does this help my business, perform better? That's like the classic corporate business case.
Right.
And that's kind of centering this capitalist narrative, right? We're about the profits. And if you can show me by hiring Black folks and hiring women, whoever else you want me to hire, if you can show me that can help me to sell more, whatever I'm trying to sell, then it's okay. So I think that to some extent, I was just talking to a very large client just before this. I will not name that client, very old client, 150, 160 years old, very old, middle of the country. And, that's just trying to get this stuff off the ground. And you've come in talking about marginalized groups and whatnot to a bunch of these white men. They're just not going to, it's just not going to happen. So it's this delicate balance act of on the one hand, you have to be able to engage the groups so that they listen. And on the other hand, you're trying to dismantle, this dominant, sort of a narrative that doesn't necessarily work. And it hasn't worked. 35 years, 36 years, all of the same issues that I was teaching and talking about 36 years ago are the same. As a matter of fact, my book, Black Fatigue, will be coming out in February. Black Fatigue, How Racism Erodes the Mind, Body, and Spirit comes out in February. And I have a chapter in that book, chapter 3, called Then Is Now. And so I go back and I look at data from whatever point you want to take. You can take it from 1965, 1975. Doesn't really matter what point you want to take it. When we look at our data and our statistics, we have not made progress. We're stuck and we're at this standstill.
Right.
Brown versus Board of Education was 1954, which was to desegregate schools. Our schools are more segregated today than then.
Right.
The Civil Rights Act of 1964, all of this legislation, housing. In 1975, 43% of Black people own their own homes. In 2019, 43% of Black people own their own homes.
Goodness gracious.
The net worth, and not thinking, net worth is like, what's your worth, right? Net worth. A single Black woman's net worth is $500 versus the net worth of a white woman, single white woman, which is $5,000, still low. The net worth of white people at $150-some thousand is 10 times that of a Black person. And it follows even if you look at college educated.
That's
so
right.
Somebody who has a PhD, who is a Black woman college professor with a PhD, makes 20% less than a white man who has a PhD, and 7 to 8% less than a woman who has a PhD. And so all of these inequities, and I'm using those just as an example, is about then is now, that we haven't really turned the corner. So we're fatigued. So they're right about Black fatigue. So, and it's particularly tiring for me because like you said, I've been doing it for over 35 years. I'm tired.
You're absolutely right. And I believe, or rather, we've had conversations about that on Living Corporate. And we cite the study Umbrellas Don't Make It Rain, that really goes into dispelling the myth that higher education means, will somehow close the wealth gap, and it hasn't, and it doesn't. Let's talk about this. There's a variety of folks that we've had on Living Corporate who have said that, diversity and inclusion, corporate diversity and inclusion is inherently anti-black, not just in its external doings, but the internal politics. Do you have any thoughts on the veracity of that position?
Well, society is inherently anti-Black. So by extension, the corporate world is inherently anti-Black. We live in a society that has historically and continues to be anti-Black. I don't know. Yes, so I agree. Right? So... Yeah, so, D&I is inherently anti-Black. It is because that's the society, that's the society. And when I wrote this book, Black Fatigue, and I was telling people about this, you got please write about Black and brown fatigue, and and all deference to indigenous people and Native people and Latinos and everybody, right? But the Black experience in the United States has been different than any of those other experiences, and because of that, the stereotypes and the marginalization plays out differently. And so I really felt a need. So even though my data and statistics, I show statistics for Latinos and Asians, as well in the book, but I really wanted to focus on how this is playing out for Blacks. Because let me tell you, I say, I used to use race. I say race is diversity's 4-letter word, and particularly when you're talking about Black folks, people don't want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about the Black and whiteness of it. Let's talk about Asians. Let's talk about Latinos, right? And so this anti-Black, so that's one way anti-Black plays out. We have to include the other groups that we have in our race. We had a call with a client just on Friday, and they talked about how the psychologist, the sociologist, whoever we were quoting, I forgot who it was Black. And so we're like, yeah. And they said, well, perhaps we need to get some other experts, included in this data set. What's that about?
What is that about?
Do you have any Asian? Is there some Asian people who spoke on this too?
Yeah, what are you talking about?
So, so yes, I mean, yes, we live in an anti-black world, and by extension, our corporations are anti-black. I mean, look at things like this recent legislation around the Crown Act. Why does anybody freaking care how I wear my hair?
Yeah,
Why do we have to have
Yeah.
Why do we have to have legislation for people to be able to wear, for black people to be able to wear their hair the way they want to wear their hair? The young man he was a wrestler, right?
Yes.
And
They made
him cut his hair.
His dreads.
Right? His dread, right? Exactly, right there. I mean, why do you care? You don't have to like. What I say to folks when I say, I don't care if you like it or you don't have to like my hair. I'm not asking you to like my hair. But are we at such in a slavery? There's no freedom that we can't even wear our hair the way we want to wear our hair? You know what? I heard about hair 36 years ago when I was in the corporate world.
Wow.
Well, I don't know how many years ago. When I was in the corporate world, and I had a very short afro. And one day a colleague, wasn't even my boss, colleague comes in my office and said, "Will your hair grow?" And I just looked at him and I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, you ought to let it." And he walked out of my office.
Wow.
That's why I left corporate. One of the reasons anyway.
Goodness gracious.
Mm-hmm. So, but anyway, yes. So yes, is it an anti-black world? Yes, indeed. Indeed it is. Unfortunately, it is. And when you say that, the problem is when you say that to white people, they think that you're calling them a racist. And I'm not. What I am saying is the very foundation and structure upon which our very society and the way we think and the way we, and the policies and all of those things are based on anti-black sentiments, anti-black beliefs, if you will.
I'm really curious about because you're right. We had Brittany Harris on the show some time ago. And we were talking about decolonization and dismantling and deconstructing systems, right? So it was more so about trying to make some shifts and some headway in this work because like you said, there's a lot of conversations that have just been happening. They've been recycling for years. And I'm curious to know, what are you seeing some other DEI groups or kind of names, things that they're saying that you're like, man, we've been doing that. We've been working on that. Or that's not new. Y'all think it's new, but it's not new. Does anything like that stick out to you?
Yeah, I think that, the whole idea of, the oppression, marginalization, privilege, all of those kinds of things, I think have been out there for a long time. We all remember, those of us in this work all remember Peggy McIntosh's The White Privilege. Judith Katz, my colleague, did something on heterosexual privilege back in the 90s. And the Peggy McIntosh's was back in the 70s, brown eyes, blue eyes, which shows, bias. We now call it unconscious bias, but Jane Elliott, put that out in the 70s, 60s or 70s. I was using that video. Now that you've already dated me, I'll just keep going with it. But I was using that video.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. I'm just teasing you. I was using that video in the 80s, right? And now I hear people like, "Oh, do you know about Jane Elliott's video, brown eyes, blue eyes?" I'm like, yeah, brown eyes, blue eyes. Yeah, that's been out there for years and years. And you see, that's the other thing in terms of why I wrote Black Fatigue, is because, and I'm not saying this is not about millennial, this is not about generations at all, about thinking this stuff is new. This is about folks who are at my age group, who this is all like a revelation, right? Right. We didn't know. So here's case in point. We know that the COVID-19 is disproportionately impacting particularly Black people. And when it came out, this disproportionality came out, it was like, oh, wow, we have health disparities? This is not new. These health disparities have been well researched, well written about, and they continue. They have not improved. Even middle-class Black women are twice as likely to die in childbirth. These are not new. And so that's what's, part of the frustrating thing is. And so I really, respect some of the newer folks who are coming in this space. And I think that they're doing remarkable work. And I'm hoping that perhaps they can put a different spin. I know Brittany has brought definitely a different spin to our work. We probably, when Brittany came on board, which was 4 years ago now, I guess, we started to talk about the intersection of social justice and corporate speak, because the language was all different, right? Everything was different. So what we talk about, mapping the intersection. What is the intersection of social justice and corporations? So corporations worried about the bottom line. Why should they be worried about social justice as well? And how do we get that language? So I think at the Winters Group we're a little bit further ahead of mapping that intersection, of saying that it's not one or the other. It really is a both and, because if you help to alleviate the social ills of this world, or even of this country, or even of the place where you operate your business is going to be better.
I'm right there with you. That segues well into this next question, which is just, what trends do you see in this work from a thought leadership perspective? And if you were to kind of look across the landscape of this work and workplace equity as a whole, where are the biggest places you think we have to grow?
Where I see that we have places to grow in this work is fixing organizational cultures so that they truly are inclusive, and we're not just using the word, and we're not just saying that we're inclusive, because the surveys that we do inside corporations would suggest that the cultures are not inclusive, particularly for Black folks. Particularly now, when we do surveys with Latinos and Asians, culturally, they may not be having a good experience, but they're not going to tell us that, because culturally they don't talk ill of, and I'm stereotyping, I know I'm stereotyping big time right now, but for the most part, Latinos and Asians don't speak ill of their employers. That's a cultural thing, right? And so they're going to say, everything's good. We, coming from a history of dissension, a history of sort of laying it out there. Hey, we want, no justice, no peace.
Give us free. Yes.
Yeah, right. We're willing to say, no, this is not a good experience. We're willing to say in the survey, if we answer the survey. We did a big survey for a corporation recently, and not many Black people answered the survey. So then I did a focus group with them, and they said, "Oh no, we're not answering that survey." They know it. They can figure out who we are, because there's only about 100 of us in the whole company.
Real, though. Yeah.
So the point is that the traditional organizational cultures are designed for dominant groups. They always have been. In the 70s, when I was in the corporate world, they decided to bring in a whole bunch of Black people, a whole bunch of Black professionals, because they didn't have enough. And they just said, let's bring them all in here. Within a year, every single one of them were gone except one. It was probably about 30 people. Every single one of them left because the culture was not friendly, was not conducive. There were microaggressions all day long. I think one microaggression, I told you about the microaggression here's another one. So the company sent me to some banquet or something, and I was sitting and I got to represent the company. So I was sitting at the head table, and we had a little fruit cup, as our appetizer or something. And so the person sitting next to me said, "Oh, look at that. You have more watermelon in your fruit cup than anybody at the table." Now, why would you even say that? I mean, what would even make you part your lips to speak like that?
Why would you say it?
Yeah. So you know what I did? I said, you like watermelon? Would you like mine? I'll trade with you.
Oh.
So my point is that hasn't changed in 30, how many ever years that is. That hasn't changed. And so, where we still need to grow is to really get at the culture. And the only way we're going to get at the culture is to hold people accountable. And because the experience that people have in their organizations are one-to-one with their direct manager, right? And so if the direct manager is not talking the talk, walking the walk, it's not happening for that person. We oftentimes focus on the top leadership, top of the house. Let's start at the top of the house.
Yeah.
I say that we need to focus on first line leadership. Those individuals who are most likely to have the greatest span of control. First line leaders have more reports than the CEO. The CEO probably has 6 or 7 direct reports, right? All the senior vice presidents.
Yeah.
And it goes down from there. So the biggest span of control and the biggest opportunity for change is at that first level. And we oftentimes don't work with that first level of leadership because they don't have the budget for it, or, all of these other excuses. So I really think, and I've been saying this for years, so I don't know if this is a trend or not, but I've been saying this for years, that we have to get to that level. Other places that we still need to grow is pay inequity. Pay inequity for women. As women of color in that equation too. That's an easy fix. You look at your data and you see if you have a disparity with women not being paid the same amount, then you fix it. You see, this is why if organizations wanted to do it, they just
do it.
Any aspect of diversity, if they wanted to do it, they would absolutely do it. So those are areas, it's in just terms of very tactical, places. In terms of cultures are really, really hard to change. So I had a call with a client this morning, and they have a question on the survey that they wanted me to review their survey. We have our own survey, but they got somebody else to do their survey, but they wanted me to review the questions. Here's one of the questions. I fit in well at this organization.
That's a good question.
That's that's a bad question.
Talk to me. Educate me why it's a bad question.
Okay. Because it's about fitting in. Fitting in is about assimilation. Fitting in is about I fit in, meaning that
I'm adjusting myself.
I'm adjusting myself. I fit in. Right? You still may get at it, but the whole idea of even putting the language out there, so that's, colonizing language, fit. Because what do we say when you hire somebody? You say, oh yeah, they would be a really good fit.
Yeah.
And what a really good fit means is what? They're like us.
They're like us. It's interesting because the reason I was saying it's a good question is because I know a lot of I know for me, I would be like, no.
Right, exactly. And that's what they're hoping to get. But you see how the message could be from the other side is that you need to fit in.
It absolves the organization of responsibility and onus in creating an inclusive work environment for that person.
Exactly. Got it. So I said, why don't you have the question? I feel included at this organization, right? You can get the same answer, right? But you're now using language that is language that is about inclusion rather than fitting in, because fitting in is basically saying yeah, we need you to fit in. We need you to be like us.
Okay. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about Black male presenting identities in this space, right? I could be speaking selfishly, but it seems as if they're still not highlighted with the same level of attention or nuance of some other people groups. Am I being fair? If you agree with that, then could you kind of talk to me about why you think that may be?
Yeah, so this is so interesting because the chapter in Black Fatigue, I Can't Breathe, Black Men's Fatigue. And I have also have a chapter in the book called Say My Name, Black Women's Fatigue. So for the Black Women's chapter, it's almost like twice as long as the Black Man's chapter, right? And I'm like, wait a minute. I say, is that because I'm a Black woman and I relate to the experiences more? So yes. And you know what? I have been wrestling with this all weekend because I want to modify the chapter on Black men to bring more of that voice. So with Black women, I could talk about, hashtag Black Girl Magic, right?
Yeah.
What's the analogous movement for Black men?
There's nothing that big. I would say, you have Black Boy Joy, but it's not as big. And there's some tension in that because a lot of Black men are like, well, I'm not a boy. Don't call me a child. I'm a man, So I'm not sure. That's a good question.
Mm-hmm. So I write in the book about two experiences, two stories I tell. One story is about somebody who actually now he has a degree in human resources, but he prefers to work with his hands. And he comes over and he tunes up our air conditioning in the spring and changes the filters and all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
So he was over the other day, and he worked for a large heating and air conditioning organization and was doing really, really well. Had him in their commercials on TV and everything. And, he said, but he just couldn't take it anymore. We would talk about entrepreneurship while he was still working there because, he knew I was an entrepreneur and everything. So he finally left, and he's been on his own for 18 months. And he works 14, 16 hours a day. Nicest guy in the world. Got a young family, just really very customer service oriented. He said, when I go knocking on the doors, people say, I got to, know how I'm coming. Like he said, because when they see that I'm Black, they get a little afraid. Ryan is all of 5'6" and, maybe 150 pounds. He's a slightly built man.
Guy, yeah.
And so, he said, why is this? Why do I have to exist like this where, I'm just trying to earn a living. I'm just trying to, run a business. And he ran into, while he was in the corporate world, they told him one time that he couldn't get promoted because he was so good at his job that they needed him to stay in that job. That's why he couldn't be promoted, because he was so good. Another time he was told that he was promoting a particular service that they had, the organization, and they said, you're selling too much of this service. That's why he couldn't be promoted.
Goodness gracious.
So that's one. Another black guy who'd been with this organization for over 30 years, very well respected externally because he was in manufacturing and he has this particular knack he was called the turnaround man. He has a particular knack for going into a manufacturing operation and being able to whip it into shape, the KPIs and all those kinds of things. I mean, he's a guru at that, right? Lean manufacturing and all of that kind of stuff. He's a guru at that. And they would always send him to the place that was performing the worst. And he would go. So then they decided they were going to put him in D&I. And this after 30 years in a career. So he's out of his element in D&I. He's going to do his KPIs. He's going to do his, manufacturing operation. I think he turned us a few people off, right? So he ended up retiring early. No retirement party after all of this. He's doing so well on the outside because he's got articles. He's got he's well known in this space, but he was kind of forced out the organization because somebody didn't like what he said. So I think, black men, one of the parts of the chapter in my book, I have tall, dark, and handsome, right? So when a white man is tall, he's paid more. When a black man is tall, he's actually paid less.
Wow.
The darker skinned the black man is, the less that he gets paid, right? Lighter skinned black men get paid more than dark skinned black men.
I believe
that. So you take a black man who is tall and dark skinned, that feeds a whole lot of, stereotypes, right?
Right.
And the handsome, like I said in my book, black women think they're handsome, but, but the majority group probably doesn't, not so much, right?
Yeah.
But you're penalized, black men are penalized, for being tall, black men are penalized for being darker skinned. So my son, he went to Harvard, Duke, and Princeton. He studied under Cornel West. He's a tenured associate professor of religion at Duke University. So when he was a kid, he was always big. Joe's about 6'5". So he was always big, and they always told him, you're going to hurt the other kids. You got, So he's this gentle giant now because he was told, don't be too aggressive. Up until the 4th grade, there was something wrong with Joe all the time. We were always saying we had to see a psychologist. He just wasn't adjusting right, and he just all of these things. He was in a white school district, and usually the only black kid, one of two in his class. So in the 4th grade, he had a teacher, who was a white male teacher, who said, you know what? He said, I think the only thing wrong with Joe is that he's brilliant. He said, that's the only thing I think is wrong with him. And as soon as Joe started to see himself as brilliant and everybody else started to see himself as brilliant, guess what? Joe became brilliant. And voila, Harvard, Duke, Princeton grad. But if somebody hadn't told him to change his self-concept, right? And so Joe writes about hip hop and religion. He writes about the African American experience. And you might want to interview my son. His book is called Hope Draped in Black.
I'd love to interview him. Yeah, let's talk about it offline for sure.
Yeah, Hope Draped in Black. But what he talks about is how you hold hope in the wake of all of the oppression and whatnot. But we talked this weekend about black men and about the hip hop culture and the gangster and we talk about all of that and how that plays out and why that is and. Yeah, and so black men are very complex, and they have been, treated the worst. So it's tied up in self-concept. It's tied up in a whole lot of, and what one study found is that black men who have a good self-concept and are also able to figure out how to navigate, the system, they do well in a corporation. But you've got to come first with a good self-concept. And I think quiet as it's kept, all that bravado sometimes with black men, show me some respect and all that kind of stuff. Right. And I'm all of that. I think underneath is really a lot of trauma. It's a lot of trauma.
Oh, I agree with that. Yeah, no, I think you're 100%, just spot on. And I also think, when you think about black men in this space, so it's interesting because black men and white women have something in common where black men are black, yet they benefit to a much lesser degree, but they still benefit to a degree from patriarchy. And white women are women, of course, but then they benefit from white supremacy. So there's dynamics there that are nuanced in a way that black women don't. So black women are women and they're black. So they, right. So it's like, okay, it's like almost like you have there's no pool that you can pull from, or there's nothing that you can really pull from a position of privilege relative. Of course, you have able-bodied privilege and if you're cisgender and all those things, but like if I'm talking about like at a high level. But I was gonna say, it's hard to talk about that because black men benefit from patriarchy, but it shouldn't be hard to at least try to engage in the subject a bit more intentionally because, I mean, it hasn't stopped white women from being the center of attention for diversity and inclusion efforts for decades.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I think you're right. And so in the book, Black Fatigue, I question whether, to a certain extent, yes, I guess I would agree that black men benefit from patriarchy, but it's more intra-culture than it is inter-culture.
Right, because black men ain't out here about to just be out here disrespecting white women at work.
Right. Yes, that's there you go.
I mean,
yeah, not unless nobody better know about it anyway, right?
Right. Well, shoot. Right. And I think that's well, and that's the thing. It blows my mind. Like I had a conversation. I never forget. I had this was some years ago. I had a conversation with somebody who tried to like insinuate that the reason why I spoke so much at work was because I was the only man, and perhaps because as a man, I'm used to dominating conversations. And I said, look, I might be the only man in this space, but I'm also the only black person in this space, and certainly only black man. I said, so if you think that the reason why I'm quote unquote dominating this conversation is because I'm a man and y'all are a bunch of white women, that's false. I said I would actually be more akin to being quiet, as it took me time to find my voice as a black man in white spaces. I said I would challenge you to ask why you think you would use the language that I'm dominating anything by simply raising my voice in a meeting. Mm-hmm. Right? I agree with you. I think that there's again a lack of nuance when we talk about even how patriarchy is mobilized for black men. I think black men are benefited from patriarchy with other black people. They don't benefit from patriarchy. Like if it's me or Karen's gonna win out.
Right. Exactly. And for reasons like I was saying earlier, these studies show, a tall, you've got the stature, if you will, that's a negative. You've got the color that's a negative, right? And so I think that it is an intersectionality in white spaces. You're black and you're a man. It's a marginalized identity.
So, your colleague, Brittany Harris, VP of Learning Innovation at the Winners Group, who we've had on in the past, has said that power is the silent P in this work. I'd love to hear more from you on the concept of power and how it fits into this engagement of workplace equity.
Yeah, it is very much at the center and it's complex. And when folks have power, why would they want to give it up? So I am not a proponent of power and privilege discussions with novices in this work. So folks who have not, I'm talking about people who are trying to teach. People who are trying to teach who have not had years of kind of understanding of how all this plays out. I'm not in favor of going in and telling them they have power and privilege. Yeah, I have it and I want to keep it. Right? I mean, why would somebody want to give them? I'm standing, a black woman standing in front of a bunch of white men talking about you have power and privilege. Yeah. And so, and they would look like, yeah, what's wrong with that? I mean, they don't say that. And the other thing is, how do they relinquish that power? I mean, that's really difficult to do. And the other problem that I have with that, so yes, there's this inequitable power dynamic. But the other problem that I have with that is that we are accepting that we don't have power. We're rendering ourselves powerless, right? And so in the corporate world, what is the key term? Empower. We want to empower our people. EM, right? Empower, right?
Right.
That is somebody giving you the power. So this is part of the corporate speak that I don't like, right? It's part of the dominant culture corporate speak. I should have written about that one in my book. I might still. Anyway, I want to turn that around, that EM to ME, me power. I have power. And so we have agency, but we don't take it. We don't use it because we have internalized that we don't have the power. We don't have power. This is one of the trends that I'd like to see. Not to continue to talk to folks about power and just use our power, not to magnify the inequity. Just so everybody knows that if you're a white man in a corporation and whatnot, and you're the manager or the leader or the director or the whatever, everybody knows you got power.
Right.
You don't have to tell me I got power. Why are you going to tell me that, right? And so I think that there are other ways to claim power. I think that part of that is just the confidence that we come with, the self-concept that we come with. I think that we have to be ready to leave spaces because there are consequences for us exercising power, and we have to have some safety nets, more safety nets than we have. So I left, some 30 some years ago. I just stepped out on faith. Because I have a strong faith, and I didn't know what was going to happen, but I just knew I couldn't stay there.
Right.
We do know that Black women, they're 40% more likely to start their own businesses than any other group, right? Because we recognize that it's traumatizing. And so this idea so who came up with the idea of power and privilege? White folks. To tell us that there's a power inequity. Surprise, surprise. And you know what? We're not going to change that by telling white people that they have power. That is not going to change it.
Right.
The only thing that's going to change it is for us to claim our power and to recognize that we have it.
I love it. No, I'm right there with you.
Right. Stop telling white folks what they already know. They got power. They already know that.
They know they have power. No, it's true. Them not like screaming it from the rooftops doesn't mean that they don't know that.
Well, exactly. Why would I scream it from the rooftops? Again, the dominant group it's not something that they probably even, perhaps, but even when we call their attention to it, there are many who will want to say, and let me figure out how I'm going to maintain it. There might be others who are curious. There is this dynamic. Maybe I should, do something to work on that. But the forces are so strong and entrenched, right? Over 400 years of entrenchment, it's not going to change. The 2 or 3 of the small groups that you might get who are all for shifting that power dynamic, they're not strong enough to overcome that larger group who wants to maintain the status quo. So we just have to grab the power. We have to first of all understand we have it already. It's not grabbing anything. We already have it. We just have to use it and accept that there will be consequences sometimes for using that power. And if we don't have the strong safety nets in our community to accept and to protect those folks who, get fired, are out there and, being called out on social media because they're telling the truth, or whatever it might be, we as a people don't support and protect our own as much as we should.
Man, that's like a whole separate
It is.
And what we need to do is make sure that we bring you back on when your book is close to being published and talk about that, because I do think that, we had Robin DiAngelo on some time ago, and she talked about white solidarity and the concept of essentially the formal or informal closing of ranks that white folks do to protect one another, oftentimes at the detriment or harm of Black and brown folks.
Right.
And yet I don't, because of colonization and because of just internalized oppression, we don't have that. I don't think in the same.
We don't.
And that's created so many challenges for us. I mean, since antebellum to today, right? Like we've had just so many issues because we don't necessarily practice to the same degree protection of one another. So let's do this. As you look across these leadership groups, especially during this pandemic, what are some of the top things you believe that majority leadership groups are doing today that undermine their own workplace equity efforts?
They have not educated themselves. So they think that they know. They think that their good intentions are good enough. So I've heard leaders say, I don't care if it's the right thing to do for business, the business case that we talked about earlier. I just think it's the right thing to do. So now go forth and do it. However, because they don't have an understanding of the history, or they know the history that was told wrong, they really don't know what to do. So they're making wrong decisions based on ignorance or lack of information. I think the second thing that majority leadership does, particularly in the corporate world, is that they still have to speak to and answer to shareholders. And so they're not going to do anything that is going to, jeopardize that. And so even when you're looking at board members, and what I hear oftentimes is, the board will go for that, or we've got to, satisfy the board. Well, you need to change the board. Then the board may not be, you may not have the right people, because boards are tokenized, right? They have one token black person and one, token woman on the board, right?
Right.
So those were two things. And I think during the pandemic, because of this ignorance, big companies are just not aware of the world that some of the folks on the lowest rung face. And so when you say, shelter in place, stay home, that home may not be safe. That home may be filled with violence, right? You make decisions about who are essential workers and who are not essential workers. And you don't, are you thinking about the health? Again, talking with a client today, they were talking about some of their contingent, workforce, and they were saying, well, are we going to pay, the sick pay, or aren't we going to pay the sick pay, the time out, and so all of these kinds of questions, and they realize that, yeah, we need to do that. And so I don't think that there's enough understanding of what marginalized groups face, regardless of their socioeconomic. So they're making decisions from their own lens, from their own, use the word privilege, from their own privileged lens, and they're missing things. It's coming to light, right? A lot of the stuff is now coming to light. But some of the early decisions missed the just horrific impact that this is having on everybody, but particularly those who are in the low end of the economic chain.
Mary Frances, this has been an incredible conversation. I'd love to make sure that I give you space to talk a little bit more about the Winners Group, what you're most excited about, what you're looking forward to, even during times as uncertain and extraordinary as these. I'd love to just give you space to talk a little bit more about your company.
Yeah, so we're looking forward to transforming ourselves as we always do, but this pandemic has made it absolutely imperative. We've already been doing virtual learning, but we are looking at innovative ways to do virtual, ways that other people are not doing virtual. We have whiteboards, and we have ways that we can break people out into groups. The technology allows that, but I think the ways that we're doing simulations. And so I think this is an opportunity for us to be really, really innovative in terms of how we deliver our message. I did a virtual keynote a few weeks ago. I think it's also an opportunity for us to continue our integration of the corporate message and the social justice message, because they have certainly come, together with COVID-19 in terms of just what I was just talking about, how we see how marginalized people are even more marginalized. The saying goes, when the world gets a cold, Black people get pneumonia. When the world gets pneumonia, Black people die. We're seeing that now, and I think it's the opportunity for us to even more strongly advocate for the intersection of social justice and corporate.
Man, thank you so much, Mary Frances. This has been phenomenal. And y'all, that does it for us on the Living Corporate Podcast. We do this every week, coming to y'all with real talk in the corporate world. You make sure you check us out everywhere, okay? So you pull up your Google or your Yahoo or whatever search engine machine you're using, and you just type in Living Corporate. We're going to pop up there, okay? Make sure you check out the show notes. Make sure you check out the Winners Group. Check out all the work that they're doing. Shout out to the Winners Group and all of their incredible work. Shout out to Black women out here holding everybody down per usual. Thank you for all of your work. And till next time, we'll catch y'all. This has been Zach. You've been listening to Mary Frances Winters, CEO and founder of the Winners Group, leadership, diversity, equity, and inclusion consulting firm. Been out here laying the groundwork for y'all, setting legacies, and probably your favorite consultant's favorite consulting agency. Okay, they've been out here. They've been doing the work. Till next time, peace.
Living Corporate is a podcast by Living Corporate LLC. Our logo was designed by David Dawkins. Our theme music was produced by Ken Brown. Additional music production by Antoine Franklin for Musical Elevation. Post-production is handled by Jeremy Jackson. Got a topic suggestion? Email us at livingcorporatepodcast@gmail.com. You can find us online on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and living-corporate.com. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned.